Hi, I'm Elizabeth Majok, the project coordinator for CSG Melton Brimbang. We work with South Sudanese community and their families. Uh, I'm glad to be given this opportunity to say this. I know you are working with the young people from different background, including South Sudanese young people. One of the things which I actually want to be considered as is how they treat the young people from South Sudanese background should be the same like any other young person experiencing the same issue. There is a tendency that when it is from South Sudan, there should be a different way of approaching them. But these young people these youth, they actually grew up here. Some of them were born here, and all what they know is Australia culture, is Australia way of doing things. They are a little bit different with their families. One thing which should really work well is just the way you should have treated any other young person is the way you did with the South Sudanese. And by doing that, you will engage, they will get their trust with their families. One, as you work also with a young person, you need to involve their families because to get the proper outcome from this support from the young person, it's good to involve their families. And involving their families, that is where you need to be aware of culture, because these are the people came from a different culture, and all what they want is the respect. Show them respect and they will know. When you are treating them with respect, with the dignity, they will actually know. And if there is things expected for them to support a young person, put them in a full picture, let them involve. So what we have seen always, the YJ workers, they focus on the young person because this is their client. The family is not part of what they consider. But for the better outcome, it's good to engage the families, it's good to engage the parent, let them be involved, or they will be informed fully of what is expected. I think that will get a better outcome. And also, these people, if there is something happening, it's good to be aware of how far they have come from or the background. There are so many issues going on in their life: unemployment, the intercultural issues, the educational issues. So it's good to consider them holistically, not in isolation. That's one thing I wanted to add.
Sorry, start off everybody. My name is Temisele Lua. Samoan background, employed by CMY through the Lemana and Pasifika Youth Project. Also wear a couple of hats in the community through my faith. An elder, head elder with our church, with our 9 Samoan churches in the Seventh-day Adventist denomination across Melbourne. Also a member of Victorian Samoan Advisory Council, and also a advisor to the United Sewer Council of Victoria. But as far as today's concerned, talking about young people and the culture, about cultural safety, I think this is one of the areas that we could probably do a lot more work in, as far as understanding the narrative for young people around their culture and their identity. There's a clash of these two worlds with young people. There's this Western context and there's Pacific culture. I'm speaking particularly about the Pacific communities. Some of our young people don't really understand fully their traditional identity and the culture and the practice and the protocols within the families, and sometimes there's a real disconnect there. But as far as their Western context, they engage in that area as well. But it's the supports that we put in place for these young people. That's probably where we struggle a bit. We talk about holistic approach. We talk about engagement, the disengagement, the effectiveness of our engagement. And one of the things that's really coming out of a lot of the conversations, and agencies and organizations starting to realize that we really need to be in context around the culture and awareness of the culture, and implementing, for our project, for a lot of young people, they have a certain level of their understanding growing up with their culture. So for example, for Pacifica young people, the general rule of thumb is they grow up with their extended families. It's not so much the nucleus, the father, mother, dad, and the kids, but it's the extended family. So that's the norm for Pasifika families. And so it's that collectivist approach. And I think that's what needs to happen when we're engaging our young people, regardless of whether they're in education, whether they're going through legal issues with youth justice, but in all areas, there's a role that needs to be played by the community, family, leaders, to try and provide that mentoring, to provide that knowledge to practitioners when they're working in these spaces. And I think if that gives an awareness and creates an understanding on the practitioner's part, then again, that adds to the narrative. As far as Pasifika, it's all about this narrative, the story that we tell about the journey that we take. And we have to really, in context, bring the whole system into place here. There's a real gap as far as community, cultural understanding, and when you're coming into a Western context where you're looking for employment, where you're going for education, it's a very Westernized modern context. So to provide the support that's needed to close this gap, we need to bring families in. We need to engage more with the family so that it's a community-led, well, a partnership in a sense, between the services sector and people that are in the Pasifika community. Otherwise, that support is not existing. So that's that collective holistic approach we talk about in our practice in the sector, but also it needs to be that same. So we need to bridge this gap where we can bring both these systems in place. And a lot of that has to do with primary carers. For example, mums are always at the forefront when our young people get in trouble. Where are the dads? You know, and at what level can we have dads engage with their young men? I mean, that's the core of the work that I do as far as a male, is working with these young men. And the nurturing is there from the parents, from the mums, aunties, older sisters. But as far as a role model, to have a male role model in there, it sits with the fathers or the uncles and that, but there's a real gap there. So how do we then, as a sector, working with young people, disengaged, disconnected, can add more effectiveness around our engagements? And culture is one area. And I'm happy to be in this conversation because we need to highlight that a lot more and look at ways of how we can bring the culture in, because that's the actual lived experiences. Some of the, and parents need to understand the Western context. How can they engage in this world the young people are involved in so that their outcomes can be reached and their dreams and their aspirations can be reached? Because if they succeed, that comes back on the families for the success of the families and the success of the community. But there needs to be a lot of work and effort put into that area, especially around the culture, to try and connect it to our sector and the practice that we do. There's a bit of a gap there, but I think from the lessons we've learned in our engagements to this point, we need to really visit that a bit more and see what that looks like and how that pans out. So we're happy to jump on board. Le Mana Pasifika project has become a cultural platform where we try and introduce that to inform workers about this engagement, going into the spaces of these families and knowing how to connect and culturally in appropriate ways and practices, instead of just coming in with a Western context and then there's a gap straight away. There's that disconnect straight away because there's no, what we call gileva, this space, this relational space, that needs to be addressed first in a cultural context to be able to move forward from that point on. So if we come in with a Western context into a Pasifika space, then the gap, you haven't fused that gap. So it's this relational space that we're so hung up on as Pasifika people because we're conscious of this gap, this what we call vanga wufu. So that's part and parcel of the area that we need to look at before we can even move further on. Because we will not do away with that stuff because that identifies our culture as this relational space. If we don't address that space properly, then we're going to be having a very disconnected relationship from that point on. So we need to look at that space and how we can complement that space. That way, it's not necessarily just Pasifika, but it's actually professionals coming in. The Western context is in that space. We can include that and really build that relationship. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Dominic. I'm a community support. I'm a youth worker for community support groups, CSG, Melton, Bringbank. I work with young South Sudanese, you know, the ones with involved with YJ and just other ones that, you know, I engage. Maybe one thing I would like the YJ to be able to consider is involvement of these young people in the process of you know, in the process of them like on this journey that they're, especially because the young people are going through a journey, and to just give them the control of the journey. You know, instead of setting up a plan and then saying, oh, this is what we expect you to do and this is what we expect you to do, we have to be mindful of these young people. They're going through a lot and they all want to achieve so much, and there's so much pressure around them, you know, peer pressure, family pressure, and just even personal pressure, you know, because they expect so, they want to achieve so much. So because of what I've seen so far, a YJ worker will get these young people, especially those ones that are coming out from custody and are involved through the YJ system. They will sit down and say, oh, this is what we want you guys to do, you know, this and this and this and this. But is the young person thoughts of goal, you know, have they been considered? Have you actually sit down with this young person? Have you spoke with their family? You know, because there's so much complex around. You know, it's not an easy thing just saying, okay, this and this is how we work with it. I think the previous speaker have said it all. You know, it's so important to have that family involvement, you know, in the process of this journey with this young person. You know, mothers, as we said, mothers are important as well. Fathers, everybody in the family is whoever is involved at that time, because some young people of the family they don't have everybody. You know, they probably just live with the mother, or they probably just live with the father, or they will probably just live with uncle or auntie. You know, so if you get these people, everybody involved, because as a South Sudanese, we work as collective. You know, we're family. If something happened in our family, like even now, some of them being locked up, you know, families don't even know. They don't know the court dates. They don't know involvement, building trust, you know, because you want them to be able to open up. A young person can come and tell you, yes, this, I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this. But are they really going to do it? And that's the reason why they're not actually doing that, because they're not involved in their decision making.
My name is Rayak, youth worker from community support group Mel and Brimbank. I work with South Sudanese and South Sudanese families and the young people. I've worked alongside a lot of youth work, YJ workers in the past, and I've got to say, like, YJ workers do a great job with our young people all over. Get that wrong. One thing I'd like to for YJ Department of DOJ workers to consider when implementing the work is I'm going to speak on the South Sudanese point of view. South Sudanese young people, as everyone touched on, like about getting their families involved. But how do we get their families involved? Getting the families involved to me looks like getting their parents, giving some power back to the parents, getting the parents involved in informing the parents of the child's orders, informing of the child's curfews. They have to do sign-ins, upcoming court dates. Because if you leave it up to the young person to go home and tell that to their parents, or it will, 9 times out of 10 it will not happen. I think the YJ workers could use the parents as a tool to help engage these young people. So work alongside the parents. So if the parents are informed of what their kids are going through and what their order is, they're able to when they're at home, they're able to watch them more and they're able to tell them, like, if it's 4 o'clock, you have an appointment with blah blah blah, or you should be at this place at this time. Because most of the times their parents don't know. And I'm sure a lot of youth workers would have had a point where you've called the parents and they've said, oh, he said he was going to an appointment, or he said he was going somewhere and the kid hasn't been there. So I think getting the parents involved in that way, where they're taking their kids to the appointments, and knowing where their kids' appointments are going to be, who they are with, how long the appointments are going to be for, if they're not going to take the kids, or how the kids are going to get back home, all that. You know, I think that's something to consider. And also, as a South Sudanese worker in the sector, I think it's okay for YJ workers or any other workers ask questions. If you have someone within your network that's from that culture, it's okay to ask questions if you don't know, because knowledge is power. If you don't know, there's nothing wrong with that. Just ask. Most likely someone will answer.
My name's Martha. I'm a youth worker for the Limana Pasifika project. So I'm based out in the Brimbank area and work with Pasifika and Māori young people. Definitely the term "it takes a village to raise a child" comes into play. For the Pasifika community, this is adamant. It does take a whole village. Like what Tamessa was saying, extended family, uncles, community leaders, community ministers, all play a part in a young person's well-being and health, and also their journey as well. And this is what I'm kind of working alongside a lot of YJ workers. We get it. There's a lot of workload for you guys, and you guys have a lot of clients to take care of, a lot of young people to deal with, a lot of appointments to schedule in. And what I've been seeing is that the concept of "it takes a village," it's that basically it takes a whole bunch of service providers to go along on the journey with this young person. What I've been seeing is that a lot of YJ workers are not communicating with the mental health service or communicating with family support service. So what I try and do is try to implement that context of basically creating a whole village to be able to assist this young person alongside their journey. I emphasize the whole basically building a relationship with that young person because it does take time, but when you hit the mark, this young person will be able to grow and tell you a lot of things about their life. I know sometimes it's hard to engage, especially with Pasifika parents, but that's okay because we do have basically what they'll do is either get an auntie or someone in the family that is a voice for reason. For example, in the Tongan concept, if the mother and father are not available and they just don't want to deal with that situation because they have a lot of things happening at home and probably another 5 kids to deal with, they will send an auntie, which would definitely be the brother's sister. That person is the family's voice of reason. So if you can't get in contact with the parent, you definitely will ask that young person, who's the voice of reason in your family? That young person would know because that young person will see that person speaking at every single family function. Like what Riak was saying, definitely ask questions. You know, if you've made that call to family and you've knocked on the door and you couldn't get through, keep consistent. Keep asking the cultural workers out there, such as myself, on who's next to call, who can I next engage with. I can't engage with this family. It's been difficult for me. You know, that there are cultural workers out there, such as myself, Dom, Riak, Tamessa, who'll be able to assist you because of that whole concept. You know, it does take a village to raise a child.
So one of the things too, I'll probably add to all the conversations of the colleagues is the engagement. There's an assessment, making sure. So, for example, working with somebody, I use justice young men. You know, the thrill of that type of lifestyle. Some of them are still on that path that haven't really hit the point where they think, okay, you know. So I'm thinking about assessment, making sure that they're assessed properly. I've said to a lot of young men that I've tried to connect with, and they're nowhere near ready to face some of these consequences. So what I say to them is, when you hit rock bottom, or when you go through more life's experiences to the point where you're learning your lessons and you hit the point where you need to come back now and start changing your path, then that's the point you need to get to. So sometimes we hit these young people with a lot of programs and services, and it's not the right engagement or the services we're providing for them, because some of these young men are not at the point where they're ready to turn their lives back on the path that they're on. But we need to give them some type of support in the sense that they can take that with them on their journey. So that's one of the things I say to a lot of young men that are incarcerated, that have come out and repeat offend, that I can't help you. I'm there for you. I'm your last line of defense. If you're in a situation where you're desperate, you can call me anytime. And when you're going through those experiences and you need support, you need to know who you can go to. That I'm talking about the repeat offenders, the ones that are really, that are really committing some of these and ongoing behaviours like this. So I've come across in some of my engagements to young people and experiences of young people that there are definitely some young people that aren't even ready to change yet. And yet we keep hitting them with these programs and services that we know in the back of our minds and deep in our hearts that it's not going to work. So I guess assessing them correctly will help to stop a lot of resourcing that needs to be there at the moment. but just providing for them. Again, it comes to this this narrative that we have. A lot of young people, and the fact that we're engaging with them, we need to know exactly what our role is and how effective our engagement is according to what we can provide. But that requires assessment. We need to know exactly and hear the narrative from this young person, where their journey is, because sometimes we come in guns blazing thinking we know all the answers, and we haven't actually sat down and heard what this young person's going through. And even the fact that they're reluctant to share their story, that's a real reality with us as professionals. We need to find out a way of opening the communication line so they can actually start sharing their stories. So again, this is a Pasifika cultural thing, because we're all about the storytelling. That's one of the cultural things that we look at, and bringing not only that narrative into it, but we're in that narrative as far as a sector and a youth worker, and youth justice workers in the custodial precincts and that. So we need to be aware of that. So I just wanted to make mention for that as well.
Thanks, Temese, and thanks everybody for your time.